Welcome everyone to the Recovery Capital podcast. My name is Joanna Dolan. You can't see me right now, which is probably a good thing. And recovery, so let's just launch into what Recovery Capital is. Recovery Capital is the internal and the external resources that we possess and develop that help us to obtain, maintain, and sustain long-term recovery. And I've got a bunch of really cool people with us today. Amy, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Amy DiPietro, and I am a person in long-term recovery, and I am Joanna's partner in crime on these podcasts.
Wally and Britt, you want to introduce yourselves?
Go ahead.
I'm Wally, and I'm a member of the 12-step community. Have been since 1988. I am an archivist, historian, and author. My primary areas of study are the recovery communities of the 1930s and 1940s, and the phenomenal success rate that we had back then, which I broadcast out to the world in books and DVDs and podcasts and all other forms of media. So anybody who's willing to listen.
Nice.
Hi, everybody. My name is Britt. I'm a member of the original 12-step community, and I've been a member since the 1st of April of 1989. I am an audio archivist, historian, and presenter. My audio archivist and historian abilities is I take all the recordings, everything going back to the late 1930s and bringing it forward, do a lot of digital remastering so that future generations can hear the pioneers and the founders of our recovery process.
Nice.
Plus I present with him.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you. I appreciate that. You hear that? He said the brains
I
of the
did.
outfit.
She makes everything
yes,
work.
very nice.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah.
He's the Deus Ex Machina, the god from the machine.
Yeah, I'm the tech wizard.
She's the tech wizard.
Thank you guys for being here. I've been looking forward to this conversation all month.
Us too.
Yeah. Glad to be here.
Oh, good. So tell us why studying the history of recovery since the 30s is important. Like, why don't you study it before the 30s?
Oh, actually I do, but my area of concentration is the 1930s and 1940s. In terms of the first of the 12-step communities, the Washingtonians of the 1840s through the 1870s was an integral part of the precursors to 12-step recovery. The Washingtonians came out of Baltimore, Maryland in 1840. It was 8 sots, as they called them back then, who were drinking away at Chase's Tavern and realized that they couldn't stay sober alone. And they decided to try to stay sober together as a recovery community. Not only did it work, but they had a business meeting, and this was a couple weeks later. And at the business meeting, they elected one of the 8 president of the Washingtonians, CEO, because he didn't make the business meeting. So this is something for all of you people in recovery. Don't make the business meetings. Guess what? You may just be elected to something.
That's usually how it works. Even today, you know, don't show up and you're gonna have a job. I promise.
That's exactly how it works today.
But the Washingtonians, yes, it is. The Washingtonians fell into disarray. I mean, they went from 8 people in Chase's Tavern to 400,000 membership when there was only 17 million people in the country. So this was a major positive movement. The consumption of alcohol was cut in half during this period of time. But they didn't have the traditions. And one of them was anonymity. But John Goh, who was one of the leaders of the Washingtonians at the time, started becoming a circuit speaker throughout the United States, and he relapsed. And that made all the newspapers and really discredited the Washingtonians in terms of their success. And then they got involved in politics, and that's what ended the whole thing. They got involved in the wet dry movement, which became prohibition. They got involved in the Civil War and all kinds of political brouhahas led to the final dissolution of the Washingtonians.
Which was when?
But then 1840 through 1860 was the highlight of the Washingtonians.
And then came
the Oxford Group, Emmanuel Movement, New Thought Movement, all at about the same time. Now, in terms of the Emmanuel Movement, that started at the Emmanuel Church in Boston, Massachusetts in the early 1900s. And what they did is they built a little jitter joint, a little detox behind the church. In downtown Boston. Again, I've been to the church and I've gone through their archives, so I've got a lot of their historical materials. And they noticed something quite soon after the launching this jitter joint for the down and outers, the alcoholics, the drug addicts, and the homeless. Everybody was welcome. But they found something that became an integral part of recovery. And that is that those who left the little detox and didn't come back also didn't stay clean and sober.
Yep.
And those that did come back did stay clean and sober. So working with others became an integral part of their program. There's been about 5 or 6 books on the Emmanuel Movement. It's a movement that very few people in recovery even know anything about.
Yeah, I know last weekend we were asked to talk more about that when we were doing our sponsorship workshop.
Yeah, because the Emmanuel Movement was an integral part of the recovery process. And, drunks working with drunks, addicts working with addicts, obsessive compulsives working with obsessive compulsives. All that goes back to the Emmanuel Movement. Again, Remaking a Man, written by Courtney Baylor in 1918, went through a basic program of recovery having to do with psychological suggestion and spiritual exercises. The key is that they were launching a spiritual program of recovery. Even though they're operating out of the Emmanuel Church in Boston, Massachusetts. This was carried through into the 30s and 40s. Then we have the New Thought Movement, which came out of England, which was, again, basic Christianity without all of the falderall. No church, and none of this idea that you have to believe a certain belief system in order to be a member of that church. The New Thought Movement was all about nutrition, exercise, and keeping a clean mental outlook on life. So, and that was important because Sermon on the Mount by Emmett Fox was one of the major books. It was required reading by the early members of the first of the 12-step communities. And there were only 2 meetings in New York at the time. And this is the late 1930s. And one was in Bill Wilson's home, Bill and Lois Wilson's home. And the second one was a required meeting that all of the members had to go down to the Biltmore Hotel on Saturday night and listen to Emmett Fox. And there was sometimes 3,000 to 4,000 people in the audience, him carrying a message of love and tolerance. And that's what was carried into the big book. Love and tolerance is our code. That came from Emmett Fox. The third organization was the Oxford Group that started in the 19-teens and didn't really take root until the 1920s as the first century Christian fellowship. But they had some basic beliefs that did carry all the way through to the entire 12-step community. First of all, in the 1930s, they moved away from religion to spirituality. A lot of people still think that they were a religious outfit, but not when Bill Wilson was involved with them. So their program was based on 4 standards. Some people call them the 4 absolutes. They're called absolutes in England. A lot of people in the United States didn't like this idea of absolute anything. So the United States, including Bill.
We were fluid back then.
The only thing I can do absolutely well is drink. That's what he used to say.
Yep.
So that became the 4 standards of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. So they had 4 standards to guide their lives by. And the opposites were resentment, fear, selfishness, and dishonesty, which Bill put into the big book. But again, the big book is based on assets and liabilities, so we'll get into that a little bit more in detail as we go through this. But 4 standards, 4 spiritual activities for recovery: surrender.
What are those?
Sharing, amends, and guidance. Well, sharing became our steps 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
I mean, surrender became our steps 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
Sharing became steps 4 and 5. Amends became steps 8 and 9. So what they did is they lumped 6, 7, 8, and 9 together, and guidance 10, 11, and 12. So whether you take the 4 spiritual activities or the 12 steps, it's an identical program. Verbiage is slightly different, not that much different. But the key to it was what became step 11, which was prayer and meditation and 2-way prayer. It was absolutely critical that you got quiet every morning, listen to the indwelling spirit. Now you've got the test to separate self-will from God's will. Self-will being the liability side, the assets and liabilities checklist. God's will becoming the asset side of the assets and liabilities checklist to see which side of the page you on. They shared their guidance with sharing partners. That's what they were called. And they made a nightly review. Very similar to what we find on pages 85 through 88 of the big book. So that was lifted almost verbatim from the Oxford group. And those are the big 3, but I like to visualize it in terms of the reason that this was so important. If we make a square and we take that square and we put it over a map of New York City, within 1 square mile of downtown Manhattan, we had Sam Shoemaker, the leader of the Oxford group for the entire United States. We had Emmett Fox, the leader of the New Thought movement. We had Courtney Baylor, who was one of the leaders of the Emmanuel movement, and a guy by the name of Bill W. All 4 of them knew each other, all 4 of them traveled together, and all 4 of them fed off each other. That's why I'm saying, and Bill even says it himself. He said, I didn't write the big book. I assimilated the big book.
That's it.
And we have a book that I wrote 21 years ago now, How to Listen to God. And the middle 7 chapters of this book are the 14 books that Bill used to write the big book. This is how Bill, Bob, and the first 100 took the steps before the big book was written, all based on the 4 standards, the 4 spiritual activities, and prayer and meditation. So great source document for anybody within the 12-step community.
Yeah.
But it didn't divide everybody out into little rooms and you go here and you go there, because you never talked about your problems.
Nope.
Which gets into the formats from this period of time. You didn't go to meetings to talk about your problems. That's what sponsors were for.
We certainly didn't have open discussion meetings either.
And we certainly didn't have open discussion meetings, which have been labeled by a lot of people within the therapeutic community as, group therapy without a therapist, which leads a lot to be desired in terms of success. But the original program in the 1940s, I have spent decades studying that program. But part of the reason that I've spent so much time studying that program, I want to back up and talk a little bit about how I became an archivist, historian, and author, if that's okay. Are we okay with
We love that. Yeah, we
absolutely.
love that.
Then let's do it.
Yeah, we both had different journeys in becoming archivist historians. So
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
both do it. So in terms of my journey, I walked into the rooms of recovery to get the heat off. I had a Fortune 500 company I was working with that thought I had a problem. And I started going to meetings to prove to myself that I didn't have this problem. Well, we see how well that worked. But I was in total denial, not just a river in Egypt. I mean, I truly was in total denial that I had this problem. But I went to this meeting, and after the meeting, I was hot-footing it to the car to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible, just like the typical newcomer. And this guy's running faster than I am. He catches up with me and taps me on the shoulder. And I turn around and he said, "You're Wally, right?" I said, "Yeah, I'm Wally." And he said, "My name's Phil, and I'm your sponsor." What does that mean? "I'm going to take you through the 12 steps. "Oh, those steps that were on the wall that they read about in the meeting? Yeah, that's my job." I didn't know you had jobs in the first of the 12-step programs or any of the other programs, but he said that was his job. And I basically didn't have much option. He had me by the collar. But to let you know from here on out why this was such a turning point in my life, I came in 1988 and was taken through the steps in less than 4 hours by a man, Phil, who came in 1968. And he was taken through the steps in less than 4 hours. His sponsor came in 1948 and was sponsored by one of Dr. Bob's sponsees. So I'm third generation of the original program of recovery. Not what you hear today and not all the falderall and all the confusion. I was taken through the pure original program in less than 4 hours. In the parking lot, he took me through step 1. First of all, he told his story. 20 years ago, he crawled off from under a bridge. Now he's president of an oil refinery. Then he said, "Well, you're in one of these meetings. Let me ask you, are you an alcoholic?" And I said, "Phil, I came to this meeting to prove I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have this problem." He said, "Oh, doesn't matter. It's only 3 to 4 hours out of my life. I might just save your life in the process. But since you're not an alcoholic, I'm still going to work with you." Because the second half of the first step is all about page 52, paragraph 2. It's called the first step hook. Is your life unmanageable? And he had this all memorized off the top of his head. You having trouble with personal relationships? Oh yeah, just ask all my ex-wives. Depression, yeah, ask all psychiatrists. But just when I got them all right, I thought. And he said, yep, if you even answered yes to one of them, you're ready to take the first steps. Forget about the 64, 65 pages surrounding that one paragraph that's absolutely essential. Is your life unmanageable? Page 52, paragraph 2. So I took the first step based on unmanageability. Second step, do you have any belief system? And I said, no, none whatsoever. I was still blaming God for the Vietnam War. I'm a Vietnam veteran. And if you saw what I saw for 2 years on the DMZ, well, it shook me to the bone, and I just turned my back on religion. And he said, no, we're not talking religion, but if you don't believe in any of this, I'm still going to take you through the steps. Because in the second step, there's also a hook. Do you believe that I believe? And he asked me that question. I said, yeah, Phil, I believe you believe. 20 years ago, you crawled off Moon River Bridge. Now you're president of an oil refinery. He said, then you're going to take the second step on my belief until you get a belief of your own. So I took the second step on his belief, that I was willing to believe that Phil believed. Third step, he said, well, for you, the rest of the steps is God as you don't understand him, because you have no comprehension of what this is all about. So the third step of prayer was, God, as I don't understand you, I offer myself to you. He took out all the these and thous because he knew I wasn't a religious person. So we did the first 3 steps in 15 minutes in the parking lot. Then he asked me to read something from the big book. He said, you have a book? I said, yeah, somebody gave me one a while ago. Have you read it? No. Why would I want? I'm not an alcoholic. Why would I want to read that damn book anyway? And he said, well, I do want you to read from page 64 to the end of the chapter, how it works, and come back tomorrow night. See, there was another hook. Come back tomorrow night and tell me what you read. Whoa. Next night after the meeting, what did you read, Wally? It's an inventory. You got it. How's the inventory coming? It's done. Wow. Congratulations. What does it look like? It looks like a blank sheet of paper. And Phil goes, why so? Well, since I entered this fellowship yesterday, I don't have a resentment in the world. He said, well, you got one now. Put my name at the top of the list, and we're doing a 5th step tomorrow night at my home. So I showed up at his home with a blank sheet of paper with his name at the top of it. Phil, he looked at it and said, this is a perfect 4th step. We would not expect a newcomer to be able to do anything other than the way it was done in the early days, which the sponsor wrote the 4-step inventory. Now there's a piece of heresy for you. So I showed up with that blank sheet of paper with his name at the top of it. He asked me questions. What are you afraid of? Who are you angry at? Where have you been selfish? Where have you been dishonest? And I talked and he wrote. And that became my 4-step inventory, steps 4 and 5. Then what are you going to do about it? So we talked about that. That's steps 8 and 9. So we came up with an amends list, and then we started sharing amends, role-playing the amends back and forth on how we were going to do each specific amends. And then we finished up with 6 and 7, which is a package deal from the 1940s. It's just how it was done back then. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is a package deal, one sitting. It's actually written in the big book that way. See, a lot of things that I share, people don't understand, are from the big book. I'm not making any of this up. It's all there. We just choose either not to see it or not to assimilate it, but it's all there. And then we got working on steps 10, 11, and 12 on a regular basis as maintenance. I got a service commitment because I didn't show up at a business meeting. It became the group intergroup rep. First-hand experience. And And I never looked back. But then to have been taken through the steps in less than 4 hours and realize that that's how the first 100,000 were taken through the steps.
So how did you get from intergroup to archivist?
No, you tell your story first.
No, go ahead. You were on a roll.
Is it okay? I'm on a roll?
You're on a roll.
Don't make your
I
mad,
don't know if
Wally.
it's sourdough or Kaiser, but you're on a roll.
Okay, well,
I'll clean it up when you're
Okay.
done.
she'll tell you what the truth is.
Because I know
I
things.
embellish a little bit. No,
I know things.
No, but
I love this.
at 1 year sobriety, at 1 year sobriety,
Somebody pinch
and
me.
I'm cooking. I was the intergroup rep for a while, and then somebody didn't want the job, so I ended up being GSR for my group, and had to go to those quarterly meetings.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
And but at 1 year sobriety, he sat me down. He said, "Wally, I'm not going to be alive much longer." Oh, where did that come from? Well, little did we know that he had some heart issues, and he sensed that he wasn't going to be with us. He does pass away 6 weeks later in his sleep from congestive heart failure.
Oh,
Oh,
He said,
wow.
if you remember these two things, yeah, you may not find it necessary to take a drink for the rest of your life, drink or drug, whether I'm here or not. Wow. One, if you don't remember your last drink, you haven't taken it.
Mm.
And that's from page 24 of the big book. We're incapable of remembering even the pain and suffering of a week or a month ago. We minimize, we rationalize, we glorify, we magnify. We're great at avoiding the truth, which was and still is today. It really was not a good show before I walked into the rooms, and I was in serious trouble. So
That's a great question.
I think back to that period of time. A lot of people don't remember the last week or the last month. Phil wasn't saying you have to remember the exact day and hour. It's don't ever forget how bad it was before you got here. Don't ever forget how bad it was. And I was in the process of being fired from my third Fortune 500 company. And
You hated history.
well, that's true. I'm a scientist. I'm a chemist. Master's degree in statistics.
He does. He hates history.
Why the hell would I want to take a history class? I want black and white. I don't want all this gray stuff like the Civil War from the Northern perspective and the Southern perspective and the European perspective. Just give me the facts. Ah,
wait, I
So-
have a question. Hold on,
Yeah.
Sure.
because now I'm super curious. So, if you don't remember your last drunk, you haven't had it yet. So, how do you?
You will relapse.
What do you think about that? Like, because it's been my personal experience, the farther away I get from a drink, while I remember in terms of like, I just know how bad my life was, I'm not as close to that pain, right? That's not that, like in the beginning, you could, like, I felt like I could reach out and touch it because you're just that raw. The farther we do get away from a drink or a drug, that lessens, right? Would you agree with that?
But the memory doesn't lessen.
Yeah.
That's the key, is to not ever forget. So every morning when I do my quiet time, which is step 11, I go back to the chicken coop in Patagonia, Arizona. I think about the month before I ended up in this chicken coop, I decided to take a vacation, a 1-week vacation. And I decided I was not going to stop drinking anytime during that month. I mean, during that week. I opened the bars at 9 a.m. with a whole bunch of people that I got to know real well. I drank all day. I drank all night. Woke up, went back to the bar that next morning, and actually drove. I drove on dirt roads. I never hit the. In southern Arizona, you can do that because I've probably been arrested for my second DUI. I won't even go into the first one, but yeah, it was pretty bad. And again, the people really trying to help, but how to help. Because they were just going to send me to some employee pension thing, and I didn't take to that. But here I am in the chicken coop, and I've been challenged to go to a meeting, and I wanted to be sober for the meeting. I did have that in the back of my mind. But it's 7 a.m. and I'm throwing down some beers before breakfast, and the little combination grain room chicken coop at my parents' ranch in Patagonia, Arizona. And I'm looking down at the chickens, and the chickens are looking up at me, and I'm looking down at the chickens, and the chickens are looking up at me. And I swear, one of those chickens said, "Wally, this is not social drinking." Now, I may have been delusional, I may have been hallucinating, but that chicken talked to me and said, "This is not social drinking." And that was my life, ever.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to ever go back. Once you realize how bad it was, I do not ever want to go back to that nightmare before I got here.
Yeah.
So that's the reason. And don't chicken again. Thank you for sharing.
I don't know, Amy, for me, I'm coming up on my 32nd anniversary next week. Okay. And usually it starts about 2 weeks ago. While I'm a distance from that pain,
Yes.
I know exactly 2 weeks ago, 30 years ago, what I was doing and where I was. I may not remember all the people I was with, okay, because that's kind of a blur. But and there's a lot of gaping holes. But I know I was on my last rip-roaring bender that lasted all the way until the 1st of April.
Yeah.
And it didn't, it didn't stop until that day. And what I remember is the unmanageability. I didn't see it then. I certainly had it pointed out to me by a sponsor who too knew the original program, although it took, because of my stubbornness and being the stereotypical redhead, took me 2 weeks to get through the steps instead of 4 hours. But I'm grateful that she got me through so quickly. I got sober in a foreign country. And
well, your unmanageability was not being able to drive your car in a straight line.
But I never got a DUI.
No, but you hit a brick wall.
I did. That day, that morning, I did hit a brick wall. Literally, not figuratively, literally hit a brick wall. And
maybe you were a pair.
Running into brick walls about to change.
And a chicken got Wally sober. That's crazy.
I will say I am very grateful because I did not know what my higher power was about to have in store for me. I definitely didn't look like the lady that sits before you today. I was very much a tomboy, still am to some degree, but had a cowboy hat, dip in the lip, cowboy boots, road rodeo. And I'm not talking about barrel racing. I'm talking about riding broncs and that kind of thing. And
you have all the broken bones to prove
I do. I have all the arthritic broken bones to prove it. I can tell the weather better than the weatherman. But that's the person who came here. I was taken to an English speaking AA convention, and that's where I got sober. And
right from the car that was still against the brick wall.
Right from the vehicle to the AA convention, pretty literally. And I was literally carried in by 3 guys who loved me more than I loved myself at that moment. One had my torso, the other 2 had each leg, and they carried me in. And I'm grateful for that, you know. And then I had a lady who said, hey, after 2 weeks of being little Miss, you know, snotty and stubborn and whatever else you want to call me, in meetings, this lady came up to me and she said, I'm your sponsor. And it took her 2 weeks to get me through the steps. As far as becoming an archivist, when I came back to the States 3 years later and found out that there's all these wonderful conventions and conferences and roundups and everything like that, I started hoarding tapes because we were still in cassette tapes that long ago. And so I started hoarding the cassette tapes and listening to everything under the sun and getting historic stuff. And, you know, a couple of tapers noticed me at this convention and that convention, and they're like, hey, you want to work behind the table? I'll give you a set of cassettes free. And that's how it happened. I mean, I was listening to all this historical stuff and everything under the sun and didn't know it was going to become my life's passion, to carry the message forward, the pioneers and the founders. And so that's how it came. I just started helping tapers out, and then one taper took me under his wing, and then I started my own business, and it went from there.
What do you guys think about?
And then as people,
what do you guys think about folks that, you know, like, so when I got sober in 2012. And so, I mean, I was probably through my steps 7-8 months. Do you, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Pretty typical.
Yeah. But besides that, like, do you feel like there's, obviously your personal experience was such that you went through them much quicker. How often have you done them since then?
Well, every day. Every day.
We both do them every day.
Yeah,
And that's kind of where
steps 1, 2, and 3 upon awakening.
Yeah.
4 and 5, you share the things that are bothering you with sharing partners. You make amends quickly to those you've harmed. You forgive those who have harmed you. You do a nightly review. I mean, that's the program. What step are you on? All of them. And that didn't come from me. That came from the AA pioneers themselves.
Yeah.
When these kids started challenging them, you know, I've been on step 3 for 4 months. What step are you on, old timer?
Yeah.
What the hell are you talking about?
I don't know. I do
all of them.
Yep. I do steps 1, 2, and 3 before my feet hit the floor. While I'm laying there in bed, waking up, 1, 2, and 3, my surrender and my belief in turning my will over is done before the feet hit the floor. I do what I call step 11, part 1, my prayer and meditation in the morning, and writing down what I receive in meditation in my guidance book. So I do step 11, part 1, then I do 4 throughout the day, and then 10 and 12 as well throughout the day. And then I do 10 and step 11, part 12, part 2 at night, you know, making my nightly review and looking at my guidance and seeing if I haven't done something or need to put something, you know, for the next day that I didn't get accomplished today. And voila, you know, by the time I go to bed at night, I've done 1 through 12. And
it's a great way to live.
Yeah.
But also it goes back to the old timers. Again, I carried their message, carry it themselves.
Exactly.
And I knew many of them personally. How that all came to pass is the second half of what Phil told me as we were sitting at the table after I got my one down. The second one was, if you don't know where we came from, you'll never know what a miracle this program truly is. And as Britt has already alluded to, not only did I not know, I didn't care. And you want me to learn history? You got to be kidding me. But I went home and I took down a book off the shelf that I'd purchased and not read, much like the big. But that was a gift.
Oh.
And I wasn't reading it, but there's some pictures in there. There's a picture of Dr. Bob and Ann Smith's home, 855 Ardmore Avenue, Akron, Ohio. So I took it down to my little home group and I'm asking around the room, has anybody been to Akron? Does anybody know if there is a Dr. Bob's house? Because I thought if I walked where they walked and saw what they saw, I start to feel some of this spirituality that was obviously emanating from many, many of these old timers. So Phil saw what I was doing. He said, Wally, don't bother these people. If you want to find out about Dr. Bob's home, find out for yourself. So I easily could have picked up the phone and called Akron to find out if there was Dr. Bob's house. I got on an airplane and flew to Akron to find out if there was a Dr. Bob's house. Now, I flew out on a Saturday night on a red eye. I got to Akron about 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. I did put the quarter in the payphone and I called the intergroup office. And again, angels on the ground, somebody answered, is there a Dr. Bob's house? Well, there wasn't up until a couple of years ago, but some members of the fellowship have purchased the home and they're in the process of refurbishing it back to the way it was in the summer of 1935.
Wow.
And they're having a meeting there today. They only have one meeting a year in Dr. Bob's home. One meeting a year.
Wait, so were you there
And
on
it's at
Founders
1
Day?
o'clock this afternoon. No, that's in June. Oh, this is Gratitude Sunday.
Okay.
November 16th. November 16th is when Dr. Bob passed. And so this is the gratitude that all these people had to Dr. Bob and his contribution to the recovery community. So I rented a car and drove to where she told me to drive, which was the Arid Club. Before GPS, she said you'd never find Dr. Bob's house on your own. And she called ahead. There were two people waiting. They escorted me over to Dr. Bob's house. They didn't even go. They just said, that's the house. Off they went. And I ended up standing in the doorway for the next 2.5 hours. And what they'd done is they'd taken all the furniture out of the living room. It's a very small house.
Yes, it is.
All the furniture out of the living room, put a table, one table in the middle of the living room, put 8 chairs around it. And it was a speaker meeting with 8 speakers. All 8 speakers had been sponsored by Dr. Bob. All 8 speakers had been taken through the steps in one day. All 8 had been sponsoring within a week. All 8 said relapse was unheard of in the early days. And I dedicated my life standing in that doorway to studying the history of the 12-step community ever since, which I have been doing. I am making good on that commitment standing in the doorway of Dr. Bob and Ann Smith's home.
Wasn't one of the requirements to have over 40 years to be able to
Oh,
speak?
I missed that. Yeah, you had to have 40 years of sobriety. That's still a requirement.
Yeah.
So all of them were 40 plus, all the way up to like 52.
Well, I'm sorry. A
I missed that
requirement.
part. Thank you.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
40.
To
Yeah,
speak, a requirement to speak at the gratitude meeting at Dr. Bob's house, you have to have over 40 years.
Wow.
I know it's one day at a time, but I'm looking forward to 2020. I'll be able to speak at that meeting. Yeah.
I'm coming to
have
that
a ways
meeting,
to
by
go.
the way.
Yep.
So cool. Hey, so I got
Oh,
Well, get ready to come years back to back.
it got so large, they
Right,
moved
coming.
it into the archives home. So they'd have 2 homes and cameras broadcasting to every room and 2 houses. Then they outgrew that. And now they have it down at a school down the street, not King's School, but they do call it the King's School meeting. And at that facility, they've got room for 300-400 people in that room.
Yep.
And it's a great
Oh, wow.
experience to hear the original stories. But again, the original stories from 1948 are quite different than the stories from 1978, 80 that you're hearing today. So even today, it doesn't have the feel that it had back then in terms of actually witnessing the original program of recovery.
Well, back then they used the 10-10-40 format as well at a speaker meeting.
Which
What
is
is
also
that?
unheard of today.
Yep. So that gives it a different
What is
10,
what?
10, 40?
Yeah.
The 10, 10, 40. You want to explain it or you want me to?
Oh, go ahead.
The 10, 10, 40, good. You can correct me if I'm wrong. The 10, 10, 40 is 10 minutes of what it was like. You know, you like your little bit of qualifying, right?
Yeah.
That's what they call it today. And then 10 minutes of what happened. And then 40 minutes of what God in the Steps, how it's changed your life. If you didn't have 40 minutes back then of how God in the Steps had changed your life, you didn't speak.
You were
Oh,
pre-qualified.
wow, that's awesome.
Qualified for a speaker
And they
meeting.
gave you,
Yeah.
because they didn't want people up there doing drunkalogs, because drunkalogs were unheard of.
Yeah. So Wally and I, even today, well, I shouldn't speak for him, but I know I try to adhere to that format as much as possible, because it's more important to me to share to who's in the room what or how God in the Steps have changed my life.
And that was, again, part of the reason that such a phenomenal recovery rate in the early days. I'm just going to finish up with Dr. Bob's real quick. That Sue Smith Windows, Dr. Bob's daughter,
Yes.
was serving coffee in the kitchen. Not only did I get to meet her, but we were both terrified of speaking in public. And she noticed that. And so she had me come around the table, and her and I together started serving coffee to those 70, 80 people that were there. And again, we became the best of friends. And in 1999, I became the caretaker of the Dr. Bob and Ann Smith archives. So I am the keeper of the Dr. Bob and Ann Smith's personal records.
Well, where was that kept prior to then, and where is it now?
Well, prior to that, it was up in Sue Smith Windows' attic. When Dr. Bob passed away in November of 1950, 17 boxes went up in the attic. And 1999, I was the first person to open those boxes and catalog them. We found a benefactor, which was Brown University, Rockefeller Library. They pounded up $1 million for the conservation and preservation of those archives, because they were in very bad shape. It was water damage. The roof was leaking. Sue did receive a stipend for it. I received nothing. I received no money from anything that I've written or any service that I've performed, service work that I performed. But I was there when the Brinks truck came and took the archives. We counted them, counted everything. Then they flew me to Providence, Rhode Island. I was there when the Brinks truck arrived. And then myself and two archivists had open access to the copy machines. And I walked out of there with 7,000 pages of Dr. Bob and Ann Smith's personal archives. I mean, I've got over 100,000 pages total, but those 7,000 are really, really precious in terms of the simplicity of the original program.
That's incredible.
Now, let me get into the formats, because we did talk about the speaker meetings and the 10-10-40 format. There were only 3 formats, and it's in the handbook for the secretary. I started publishing that in 1949, and through the 50s, 3 meeting formats. Now, you could have any meeting format you want because each group is autonomous, but these are the ones that came from New York City. 1, open speaker meetings where anybody can attend, and they were a person at the podium using the 10-10-40 format. Well, how could you do that if you read for the first 20 minutes? There were no readings whatsoever. The speaker had themselves as an alcoholic. The closest anybody ever got to that was, my name is Wally and I'm a member of this outfit. I find it very curious that today we call us, my name's Wally and I'm an addict. My name is Wally and I'm an alcoholic. Jesus. What are we doing identifying with a problem? Never. We're perpetuating a failed system of negativity, of living in the past. I am a member of the 12-step community, and it never mattered how long you were a member. They didn't have chips, they didn't have any of that stuff. But the 10-10-40 format, you were pre-screened, no readings, no, I'm an alcoholic. Second meeting format was a closed discussion meetings, and these were closed to members and prospective members of the fellowship. That's when you went in the back room and you took all 12 steps in 4 one-hour sessions. And that became the beginners meetings for the fellowship. So you were not introduced to the group until you had recovered, which meant back then that I've taken all 12 steps. That's all it means. It's in the big book 17 times. Recovering is in the big book once. If you're recovered, you've taken the 12 steps. If you're recovering, you haven't. And do the concordance and look at where recovering is in the big book. It's a guy who had not completed the steps. So it's pretty clear, black and white, how we identify ourselves. So you had the beginners meetings, you had the open speaker meetings, and you had big book studies where you studied what was in that book. Now, Dr. Bob was pretty astute when he realized immediately that that book was too complicated for newcomers. And he went and stripped out 95% of the book. Thank God he did, because that's what saved the fellowship. Not sitting there reading page after page and jot and tittle after jot and tittle. But I've highlighted the 50 key paragraphs that we use to take newcomers through the steps. Now, people say, you can't take anybody through the steps in 4 hours. Well, you can if you're only using the 50 key paragraphs that Dr. Bob and the pioneers used back in the early days. And we've taken those steps, and it's a handout that we pass out at all of our seminars. All you have to do is highlight those paragraphs, and you too can take anybody through the work in 3 to 4 hours. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So you're there to discuss the big book, and preferably those 50 paragraphs. What does that paragraph mean to you? What does that paragraph mean to you? What does that paragraph mean to you? And then we just go around the room and talk about what the paragraph means to me. What are we not talking about? Our problems. That's what sponsors were for. And that's another whole subject of sponsorship, which has just become a major problem within the recovery community because of the 50,000 different sponsorship styles emanating from the 50,000 people that think they know how to sponsor. And then the rest is just the blind leading the blind. Personal opinion. Where's personal opinion? I'll put my hand up. That is a personal opinion.
Well, it is.
But we had a 50 to 75% recovery rate back then. And we got a 5 to 7% recovery rate today. Which program would you want to follow? The 5% program or the 75% program?
The 50 to 70%.
I'm in for the. What's that now?
So wait, I have a
You said the
question.
50 to
So
75%.
Yeah.
if
So is that how you got?
Go ahead, Amy.
so there's
Was that your-
there's a lot of evolution, I guess, if you want to call it that, or a lot that have evolved over the decades. And so, I'm sitting here listening to you share about your experiences in the late 80s, which were very similar to what was going on decades before that. And the things you're talking about, I don't have any experience with that, right? By the time I come along and get sober, it's very different. What did you see happening?
Very different.
How did that all slowly start to kind of change, in your opinion? What's been going on?
Excellent question, because it's not any one situation, and it isn't anything having to do specifically with the 12-step community, you can see the same thing in all of the major movements throughout the centuries, where we start with something that's very clean and clear, even going back to the New Testament and how simple it was back then, just listening to a guy and following basically what was in the Sermon on the Mount, which is living a life of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, because that's where the 4 standards came from. Live your life based upon those 4 standards. And then they went out 2 by 2. They went out in 2s, co-sponsorship, to work with others, no churches. And look what it's become. Layer after layer after layer after layer of complexity. It's happened within the 12-step community. What started as a very simple program that only took a couple hours to go through it yourself so you could take somebody else through it tomorrow and grow a fellowship. I mean, we used to double the membership until the 1980s, and that's when we stopped growing. But it was so simple back then, and it worked. But it's just human nature. Let's add a little something. Let's read the 12 steps. Oh, that sounds good. Okay. And let's read all of how it works. Oh, okay. We'll add that to it. But again, this is layer after layer after layer of complexity that wasn't there when we had a 50 to 75% recovery. And people don't realize that what they're attending today doesn't even begin to remotely resemble the program that gave us 50 to 75% recovery.
I think that, and we added in somewhere along the way, is I'm too busy, right? I wasn't too busy to go get what I needed, right, when I was still out there ripping and running. But now that I'm sober, you know, I've got a job, I've got the family, I got this, I got that, the kids got this, the kids got that. And, you know, was it the Grapevine, April of 61, when Bill Wilson said, we failed. It's not necessarily that the newcomers have failed and relapsed. It's that we in the rooms have failed them. And I think that's because we got away from the simplicity of the program and complicated it with all this stuff. Because I can't very well expect somebody new to the rooms to come into the room, put my business card in a big book, hand it to them, say, go home and read 64 pages, and expect them to call me back or to show up again, because they're going to be overwhelmed. They're not going to do it. And a sick person is not going to seek out a well person on the phone. You know, I don't do it that way. We stopped taking the time. We stopped investing the time. And by what I feel where we failed too is in investing in the newcomer, we're investing in our own recovery, you know, to get that daily reprieve. I have to take the time, you know.
And that's part of our sponsorship workshops.
Yeah.
And how people were sponsored back in the 1940s. And this one sheet of paper we do 1 hour workshops on.
Yeah.
But very, very simple process. We can go through that a little bit more in detail if you'd like. But
Yes.
It sets the stage. Well, let's do it now because it sets the stage. Because we hear the same thing in the sponsorship workshops. I don't know what you're even talking about.
Yeah, I've never heard this before.
It's 1 step a year. It's no steps for the first year.
1 step a month.
It's jot and tittle. We gotta read every word out of this book, which was never done.
4 year, 4 steps. Don't even get me started on that one, because that's a whole explanation, but it dang near destroyed a family and killed a man.
Well,
Literally.
again, once you strip out the
So,
95% that wasn't you,
so hang on a second.
you've got a program that's manageable.
Is that why you wrote the book Back to the Basics of Recovery?
I was just thinking that.
Absolutely, because the fellowship has, it's the blind leading the blind today. We don't have the consistency, we don't have the focus, and we don't have people buying in because they think it's some long, laborious process that's going to take months and years. And a lot of people who are sponsoring turn it into a program that takes months and years. And we
Okay.
wonder why they don't get it. They wonder why they relapse. We wonder why they go out and commit suicide.
Yeah.
I
So
wrote
then
an
tell
article
us,
back in 2011. Oh, go ahead.
so then tell us two things. Tell us what Back to the Basics of Recovery is, and then can you tell us about the sponsorship, what it is and what it isn't, because that really matters.
It really and truly does.
Mhm.
Now, in terms of the Back to Basics of Recovery, that is based on a book. We're not here to hawk books, but what it says is, let's get back to the basics of recovery by using a beginner's meeting format that has been specifically rewritten for use within all 12-step communities. It can also be used within treatment centers, aftercare facilities, halfway houses, recovery homes, drug courts, and correctional institutions. The material has been modified for all addictive, compulsive, and problematic behaviors, and the Big Book passages have been converted to gender neutral. That is what Back to Basics is all about. It's a 2016 version of what was actually done back in the 1940s. And we have, first and foremost, and not to disparage anything that was written in 1938 and went into the Big Book, but Bill tipped in the 12 steps after 80% of the book had already been written. A lot of people don't realize that. And the steps don't match the verbiage. So what, again, I have done is part of this work, especially the sponsorship work. Let's explain to the sponsors what the steps really mean. That makes it easier for them to pass it on to the newcomer. Step one, we admitted we had a problem. 2, came to believe that a power greater ourselves could solve our problem. Okay, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to care of this power. 4, made a searching and fearless inventory of our liabilities. It was all assets and liabilities. 5, admit to another person the exact nature of our liabilities. 6, we're entirely ready to have the power remove our liabilities. Step 7, humbly ask the power to remove our liabilities and strengthen our assets. It's the same format, but rewritten so people can understand in 2021 what these steps actually mean. I like the 11th one because it really shortened that one up. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with the power greater in ourselves. How much simpler can it get rather than all this extra wording? So we had to start by rewriting the 12 steps to make them understandable, especially to newcomers in 2021. And then we went back in and we started rewriting all the Big Book passages and taking out all the extraneous verbiage, shortening things up, going from 4 syllables to 2 syllables, taking out the words from the 1930s that people haven't a clue as to what they mean today, and putting in something that actually is meaningful for them today. So that's what we've done. And the seminars we've done all over the world. Now we're doing the Zoom seminars where people are coming in from all over the world.
Yes.
And it's just been a great experience to see the number of people who get it.
How many people have you
That
taken to the
is the
steps?
key. I have personally taken over 100,000. Now, if you look at the seminars, with 200-300 in the room, I mean, 150 to 200 in the room every third weekend for 25 years.
25.
Wow.
Just do the math.
It's a lot.
Yeah. I've taken over 100,000. But the thing of it is all of the other people, the thousands of other people that have latched onto this, and they're taking their newcomers through the steps, whether it's at seminars. There's a bunch of seminars every week
Yep.
based on this 4 1-hour sessions, Monday through Sunday. And I support each and every one of them. But the key for the ones that we're doing right now is we found out that even a month is too long. We've got to get people through the work in 2 days.
And we do.
And we do. And that's our seminar format.
Oh,
That's
And part of
So,
the reason that it is so simple. Oh, go ahead.
Let me ask you this. Where on
ahead,
the
Joanne.
where on the continuum of recovery does back to basics fall?
Funny you should ask.
Kindergarten.
Yeah, we have a handout that's part of the sponsorship workshop and the Back to Basics Recovery workshop. I mean, we're not trying to steal anybody's thunder. We're not
Yeah,
saying,
no.
let's do this and don't do that. Like other people. There's only one way to do it. It's Joe
No.
and Charlie.
No.
It's all a continuum of recovery. I'll do that over here. There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
We have kindergarten, elementary school, high school, and college.
So we
And
can't
where
see
did these
what you
programs
have.
come from? Again,
Can
but
you
it's a
tell us what
handout.
each?
All people have to do is email us.
Okay, so this says kindergarten, and that's the back to basics or the back to basics of recovery. And then, of course, that's done by us or other people who've been through it with
But it
us.
started in the 1940s.
Yep. And then there's elementary school, and they recommend that you have 6 to 12 months of sobriety, and that's typically like the Joe and Charlie. Big Book Comes Alive. And then there's high school, which is like 12 to 24 months of sobriety. Big Book Study Guide, and it's done by various people. Herb K, Don Pritz, who's no longer with us, Katie and Charlie Parker, people, Chris and Myers Raymer, people like that. And that's a good high school. Any of those are good high school levels. And then there's college, 24 months of sobriety plus. And this is where you get really like heavy, deep, in depth. And it's called Big Book Awakening. And that originally started with Joe Hawk and Mark Houston, both of which who are no longer with us. But it continues. There's a bunch out of California who are carrying on the Big Book Awakenings studies. So I recommend them. But that's for the people who've been around for a while and want something that's really like heavy duty and a lot more in depth.
The big exception to this idea of the length of sobriety is the beginners meetings.
Yes.
Because I cannot tell you how many thousands of people have come up to me after a seminar and said, I'm 21 years sober, I've never taken the steps, and now I can actually hold my head up and don't have to lie to people like I've been lying for the last 21 years. That I know how this works because I don't.
Yeah.
And then that's the key is the 10 to 20 plus year people that are taking the steps for the first time.
Yeah.
Because all they've done is don't drink and go to meetings. Don't drink, go to meetings.
Yeah. And as an audio archivist and at a convention, I've had people young in the program come up to me and my sponsor started me out on this Big Book study or this step study. And it's complicated. Do you have anything simpler? Is there anything that's a little bit easier than this that I can do? And I've seen people who've been started out on the college course, and then we wonder why they don't get it because they're in way over their head. and they need to have it broke down really simple. And, you know, shame on us for doing something, unknowingly sabotaging somebody's recovery that way. You know, and so, you know, with the back to basics and the back to basics of recovery, having something that's original and so simple, how it was meant to be, to send them to go through, you know, we might be saving a few lives.
Yeah,
my
if we
God,
can
yeah.
just
If I'm a new
visualize.
person
Yes.
and I come to you and I say, I got 2 days or I've been sober 30 days, I'd like to go through the steps. Or better yet, here's a better example. I come to you guys and I say, I've been sober for a little over 8 years. I'd like to learn more about how to properly take people through the steps. What would you tell me to do? Like, what would be my first, you know, how do I learn from that?
Well, the first,
Make an appointment.
Wally says make an appointment.
Yeah, because we take people through the steps every day.
Yep.
And we just need to get you on the calendar. That's the problem for us personally is
The calendar.
Is the calendar. It gets filled up
Yeah.
sometimes a couple weeks in advance. But I can tell over the phone if somebody is really struggling, they go to the top of the list.
Yeah.
And we take them through the steps immediately because that's part of that article I wrote, the window of opportunity. How long does it take a person to realize in recovery that the pain and suffering that they're experiencing in the rooms is greater than the pain and suffering that they remember when they were out there? As soon as they realize here than there, they're gone.
Yep.
Wow.
And the chances of them coming back are pretty slim.
Yeah.
So the key is how much time do we have to take them through the work, which is called the window of opportunity?
Yep.
Do we have a year?
Nope.
Absolutely not. Do we have a month? That's pushing it today, really pushing it.
Yep.
Do we have a week? Maybe yes, maybe no. What if everybody assumes that the person that they're looking at right now, after that meeting, is going to relapse tomorrow? We're obligated to take him or her through the steps today to prevent that relapse tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it can be done at Denny's. It can be done
Yeah.
at Starbucks. It can be done at Timmy Hortons. It only,
You name it.
once you know the key paragraphs and once you know the process of surrender, sharing, amends, and guidance, and not say, oh no, we've got to read every page of this book.
Oh God.
And we got to start at page 1, and we got to have a highlighter, and you got to do this.
Give me that. No, Amy, I was going to take your first scenario as a newcomer walking into the room. You don't come into my home group without me extending my hand. I'm going to find out one of two things when you walk in the room. First, I'm going to greet you with a smile and see if you want a soda or a cup of coffee. And then I'm going to ask you if you're visiting from out of town, or if you are a newcomer, if this is your first meeting. If you're a newcomer, I'm going to say, hey, as soon as this meeting's over, let's sit here and have a chat. We can drink all the coffee we want. Or, hey, let's go grab a bite and we're going to sit down and we're going to chat. I'm not going to let you get away that easy, because my job, as I see it, okay, is to offer just the tiniest bit of hope, right? Because the way I see it, we all come in here, I'm going to use my onion analogy, as an onion in the bunch at the grocery store with that hard, crunchy, cracked, broken shell on the outside, right? And I'm meeting you, and that's Amy right now, right? With that cracked hard shell. And we're going to sit down and we're going to talk, and we're going to take off that first piece of crunch, right? And then as we get to talking a little more and we're going through the steps the first time, we're going to peel off that first layer of crunch. And then the next time we do the steps, which may be next week or the week after, we're going to take off another layer until we get to the good stuff, right? To the meat of it, where life is good and everything's, you get the good tasty part of the onion, okay? But in that, taking all that pain off, Those are those layers of pain. The onion is the layers of pain, right? The outside, the nasty stuff,
Right.
right? In doing that, I'm also replacing that by trying to give you a little bit of hope each time as we go. So you want to stick around, you want to come back. And on that initial meeting, my job is to give you that first little grain of hope to keep you coming back.
And that can be done by anybody in
Yes.
any meeting, anywhere, if they know how to do the process. I do want to take it back to the 1940s because we have a hard time realizing that what is happening today is not in any way, shape, form of what actually happened when we had the 50 to 75% recovery rate. You go to your first meeting, there's greeters at the door. Back then they called them sniffers. If they smell alcohol in your breath, sniffers, yeah. They would take you off to the side and work with you one-on-one. So you wouldn't disrupt them.
Wow.
But if you're new and you pass the sniff test, they assigned you a sponsor and you and the sponsor went in the back room.
Yep.
And for the next 4 hours, 4 sessions, typically 1 session a week, you took all 12 steps under the guide, with a guide that was your sponsor or sharing partner. The newcomer didn't choose a sponsor. Why would we expect a sick person to be able to pick a well person? That sick person is going to pick another sick person, and together they're both going to be in trouble. No, the sponsor
has what they
chooses
want.
the newcomer. And in this case, you're on a list. And when your name comes to the top of the list, okay, Wally, you're next. Here's the guy. Go in the back room, spend the next month with him. And that person comes out of that room having taken all 12 steps. Then he's introduced to the group. Then he becomes a member of the group. So in the front room, there isn't anybody that hasn't taken all 12 steps. There isn't anybody that isn't sponsoring. There isn't anybody that doesn't have a service commitment. That's the power of a mutual support society, a mutual support system, which is what the original recovery program was. Mutual support. We're all in this together. But if you haven't taken the steps, you're in the back room. Now, the Detroit tables was a modification of that. And I love the Detroit tables.
Yes.
You all meet in the front of the room, in the big room. And you open the meeting as one meeting. Then you break into your table meetings. And typically there's 8 or 10 tables, each with a different topic. But in the early days, one table was the surrender table. One table was the sharing table. One table was the amends table. And one table was the guidance table. So you went from table to table to table to table to take the steps, which added another layer of simplicity, because what if you were called out of town? What if you got sick and you missed a meeting? You come right back and pick up where you left off. Yep. I finished table 2. I got sick for 2 weeks. Now I'm going to go back and do table 3 and table 4. And again, that after you finish table 4, then you're introduced to the group. I love that format, which has existed, again, going back to the early 1940s, the table meetings. But again, the whole idea is that you didn't let that newcomer out of your sight until he or she had gelled. And that's what they called it. When they come in, they're jello. By taking the steps, they gel. And it takes a while to gel. It takes a while for the brain cells to get reconnected. And everybody realizes that, and we laugh about it. And again, the camaraderie, in Chicago, very interesting format there, that they would not allow a meeting to get more than 20 people. Because if the meeting was more than 20 people, you could hide. As soon as a meeting
Shoot,
got to
now they've
20,
got like meetings that are hundreds.
I know, and everybody's hiding.
Yep.
So we have a situation where in Chicago, the intergroup office, I know this took a little bit of organization. As soon as your roster got to be more than 20, they would come and visit, and they would arbitrarily reassign 10 to this group and 10 to that group. And that was your new meeting. So typically it was between 10 and 20 per meeting, but never more than 20 for a very good reason. No hiding in the room. No just going to get a paper signed. Again, these people are committed to recovery. And we got a 50 to 75% recovery rate.
That's incredible. So we're gonna have you come back. Especially when people can. Yeah, we're gonna have to have you come back. But before we do that though, like I want to get into like the medicine wheel recovery the next time and to have even more conversation around this. But before we to wrap up today, like, can you tell us what sponsorship is and what it isn't?
Okay, in terms of the big book, and I don't have all of the, oh yeah, we do have the handout, but I'll do it off the top of my head. It's in the big book. The word sponsor is not used, but much of the big book shows us how to be a sponsor.
Yes.
A sponsor is a sharing partner, a closed-mouth, understanding friend, and a spiritual advisor. In the big book, that's what a sponsor is. But then all the things a sponsor isn't is a litany. Sponsor is not a nurse. Sponsor is not a banker.
Nope.
A sponsor is not condescending, looking down upon the newcomer. A sponsor is not a arbiter of anybody's sex life. I mean, that's right in the book.
Not an innkeeper.
Not an innkeeper, and not a doctor or a medical professional in any form, sort, or way. We're not there to tell people what drugs they can take and not take in terms of being sober. I mean, that's for the professionals. We do not have professional standing. That's the whole idea.
No.
We don't have the legal standing.
Nope.
The legal standing is very simple. Clergy, parishioner, attorney, client, doctor, patient, professionals who are sworn to keep a secret, confidential conversations. 12-step sponsors are not professionals. They're not on that list. Really? Why do I want him to talk about every dastardly deed he's ever done for a lifetime? If you want to sit there and write it all down, fine, but that's the key. We do have a little handout on what a sponsor is and what a sponsor isn't, but the key concepts from the 1940s, number one was put no block between the newcomer and step 12. Get the newcomer to step 12 as quickly as possible. So he or she can see, feel, experience the process works. And it really, that's what the medicine wheel is all about. It doesn't matter what book you use. There's nothing special about the big book. You can do the same process with the NA literature, the OA literature, the SAA literature,
The Al-Anon literature.
Al-Anon literature. It doesn't matter. What matters is the process of surrender, sharing, amends, and guidance, and doing it together.
Yep.
Other than 4 and 5 in a breakout room, one-on-one, in a breakout room, one-on-one. Other than that, the steps are taken together. Number 2, call the sponsee.
What?
I do not know how that got turned around, but that Never happened in the early days. Here's a big buck and here's my card. You call me. You call me at 6:12 every night so I can talk to you. How do we expect a sick person to call? Well,
That phone weighs 1,000 pounds. They're not going to call.
it was never done. The difference between what I wrote, which is basically call the sponsee, in the 1940s, it was call on the sponsee. Because the assumption was in the 40s, the sponsee didn't have a phone.
You want to see him.
And they didn't. So you physically go to where that sponsee was. You had to drive your car if you had one, take the bus, walk, ride a bicycle, whatever it took to go to where the sponsee was. Now, if you're going to go to all that work to call on the sponsee, why not take them through the 12 steps while you're there? I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. We're not going to wait.
Yeah.
You may relapse tomorrow. So I'm going to introduce you, and together we're going to take the surrender, the sharing, the amends, and the guidance. Read the appropriate parts of the big book to the sponsee. There's far too much reading to begin with, especially since 95% of this book was never used. I got all these blank pages that were never used to take newcomers through the steps. And yes, there's some important pages. You got to find one. I know there's one in here. Oh, there's one. Ding, 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 ding. 95% not used to take newcomers through the steps. So you're going to read something that's appropriate that you have already learned from your sponsor. Oh, that has to do with forgiveness, and forgiveness is on page 60 something. Oh, 67. There it is. And it's highlighted. There's the forgiveness paragraph. Okay, got it. Okay, what else we want to talk about? So I know where to go with this. Because also when we did the steps, we also put right next to each paragraph a summary. Okay, the first one has to do with physical symptoms. The second one has to do with mental symptoms. The third one has to do with psychic change. The fourth one has to do with unmanageability. Then the first step question, lack of power. Where do we find the power? Look within. What if the newcomer doesn't believe? I'm on step 2 already. Second step question. I mean, it's all so crystal clear, and you can highlight your big books and actually put them in order if you need to tell, so you can reference what's important and what's not so important. There's some controversy over whether to have 51 or 48. Yes. Sometimes more is not better. I try to keep it to less than 20 if I'm taking a newcomer through the steps. And the rest is my talking about that step in terms of my journey. And then we talk about your journey. But again, the key is to keep it as simple as absolutely possible. The fourth one is, I mean, may as well crucify me now. Crucify.
Stop it. Stop it.
I have been crucified.
You have. And that number 4 is the healing is in the sharing and not in the writing.
Sponsor writes the 4th step. What sponsor is going to sit there for the next 8 months while you write this bullshit down about every dastardly thing you've ever done for a lifetime? No, get the cause and conditions. This is what's blocking you. Let's get unblocked right now.
Yep.
It's not psychology. It's spirituality. It is spirituality. It only takes a couple events to get to the cause and conditions that are blocking the newcomer from a spiritual solution to their addiction, affliction, obsessive compulsive behavior. Again, assist the sponsee with his or her amends. That's really important. Be the first person a sponsee sees after they make an amends.
Or at least talks to anyway.
At least talk to. You're there for the sponsee. Again, in the early days, you went together. And the sponsor would sit in the car, if he or she had one, wait in the parking lot on the bicycle, say, well, okay, we're going to meet at Starbucks. Well, not back then. Back then it was Denny's. We're going to meet at Denny's, and we're going to talk about it. Because what if it goes badly? What if the person turns ugly and you start to run? Where are you going to run to? The dope den, the crack house, the bar room, or the liquor store? Guaranteed. No, you're running to the sponsor. How'd it go? Oh my God, it's the worst experience of my life. This guy doesn't ever want to see me again. And this and that. Okay, let's go to Denny's and talk about it. How'd it go? Oh, very well. $50 a month for the next 5 years. Great. Let's go to Denny's and talk about it. That's the whole idea. The sponsor and the sponsee take these steps together. Step 11, guidance, another totally lost piece of our recovery. If you're not practicing step 11, how can you expect a sponsee to be practicing step 11? And in the early days, they had guidance books, thousands and thousands of these in the archives. And again, you write your guidance in the morning, you share it with sharing partners, and you do the nightly review, just like it says in the big book. The only thing that Bill left out was writing it down, but that was assumed because everybody was already writing it down before the big book was written. So that was never a problem until much later, 60s, 70s.
Doing
But the whole
that,
idea,
so
and
when
share
I
this
took,
with-
when I did the back to basics with you guys, doing that, writing things down has changed my entire world over the last 4 years. It's incredible. And I mean, like, then doing it with it. Yeah.
And Britt shares podium all the time
I talk about you all the time from the podium
without
or-
naming names, but the lady who photographs her guidance
and sends it to me.
sends it to me as a text message. But again,
Because in doing that, Joanna, I don't want anybody to have excuse. Well,
There is no excuse.
I want to write it down, but how do I share it with people, who are here, there, or otherwhere? So I by using you, and I hope you don't mind, I take
Not at
that
all.
excuse away from them.
and the other excuse is, well, today, many people coming in today don't know how to write.
Yeah.
Many of them don't know how to read. And we expect them to go through a book that was written in 1939, written in a foreign language. We think not.
Yeah.
But again, your phone,
Talking to your phone.
you talk, it
It
records. I know
It
that. I'm not a techie, but I know it records. It's spell check, and then you send it. You
Yep.
send it to your sponsees. You send it to your sharing partners.
Exactly.
And then you can scroll back at night and review. So you don't even have to write. You can just dictate to your phone.
Yep.
This is so simple.
So
And
the
then co-sponsor
This is so
the next
good.
sponsee. Teach the sponsee how to sponsor by working together
Yep. And that's a
with the
long-standing
next person.
that's a long-standing tradition. You want to give I mean, I could do it, but would you give the history?
Oh, let's see. I'm going to take notes.
Oh,
Let's
wait, so wait a
see how
second.
well you do there.
No,
So
Let's see
hang
how
on
well
a
you do
second.
there, kid.
no, come on.
So we actually, in order to
Yes.
be able to, so we're gonna have to wrap up, because we want people to continue to listen and we want them to come back. So in order to wrap up, like, just two things. One is thank you so very much. Like, I love you guys. Like, I mean, clearly, like, you guys are part of my life. And yeah, and you guys are like, I mean, like, oh, I love this.
Whole Foods. Baltimore,
Yes.
parking lot.
Yep. How could we forget?
Oh my God.
I have pictures of the day. That was a
Me
spectacular day.
too. I love that day. So,
Yep.
thank you for this, right? Like, because not only are you like beloved members of my family, like you guys are like my heroes. So thank you. And the other part of that is,
Okay.
how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, good question.
Our phone is disconnected.
No. Wally, they can reach
That
us.
could be close.
Oh, that was so bad. That was so bad. Okay, so we have a website, www.aaBack-to-Basics.org. They can get to
Okay.
us that way. They can get to us at wallyp@theriver.com. That's our email.
That's one word, THERIVER.
Yep, both of us are, we share that email. Most of the time, I'm the one who replies. I'll be honest about that. I do a lot of the replying in the office. How else can they reach us?
Ah,
The office number?
the office number is 520-297-9348. It's the same number that we've had for 27 years.
And I'm the one who answers that.
And it's on the copyright page of every.
It is on the copyright page of every book that's printed, published and printed and goes out, so that if people get a hold of the book and they find themselves in a desperate situation, that they can, all they have to do is open the book and call us or email us. It's all in the book.
And all you really need to do is Google Wally Paton, Tucson, Arizona. The first thing that comes up is my rap sheet. But after that,
I don't think so. And it's spelled Paton.
oh,
So
yeah, one
yeah.
T.
Paton.
Yeah, we're the alcoholic Patons. We came over in 1640.
That's
Couple
awesome.
boats after. In order to tell the difference between, and we're all two T's, but the only way to tell the difference between an American patent and an English patent, according to them, was to take a T out. So we're Paton, but we are basically the same heritage as the two T patents.
I didn't get here till the night. My family didn't get here till the 50s. So
What were we thinking? That no more ships are going to come? 150,000 two T patents and
Yeah.
less than 1,000 of us.
yeah.
So I call us the
Wow.
alcoholic patents.
Yeah. Well, my alcoholic family
awesome.
got here in the 20s and the. We're a little late to the party.
But what a party!
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
love you guys. Thank you so much. And we're definitely having you back.
Love to
Thank
you.
So much for all your time this afternoon.
Anytime you name it.
It was so nice to meet you both.
And,
Oh,
and
you're
you can
welcome.
and you check out to me
Oh,
personally.
Wally, you are so terrible. Oh my gosh, just ignore him.
my appearance fee. Uh-oh, frying pan time. No, we make no money from the salary.
He makes no money from anything. Okay? He's
I'm on,
retired.
I'm on a VA pension. I'm
Yeah,
good. I'm good.
He's retired. He doesn't get any money from anything except for the VA.
Which is
That's
the way
awesome.
it should be. Let them pay for me to travel around the world and do that.
That's right.
It's all
Remember
good
that.
and love you guys.
Bye,
Do it
guys.
again.
Yes.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes,
Yes.
you will.